is very important. They're all very important, but this is very important, and that is the State Board of Education. There are 7 members up for confirmation here today, and just for the sake of efficiency, if you will, we're going to ask 4 nominees to come up, and then 3, and sort of in random order. So I'm going to ask Michael Kirst, PhD, who is the president of the board, to come forward here. Ada Molina, James Ramos, and Patricia Rucker. And you can all take your seats. I do want to. Well, let me do this. There's so many. There are members of your respective families that are here today? Close friends? No? Okay, well, we welcome all of you watching on television from home. There we go. Took care of that. I'm going to ask Dr. Kirst, as the board president, to make an opening statement. We're going to, skip opening statements for the remaining 6 members of the board, but we will engage every member in questions. All right?
Thank
Dr.
you.
Kirst, welcome.
Right. I'll be very brief because I know your time is very valuable. I'm Mike Kirst. I am a professor emeritus of education at Stanford University. I began in education policy in the federal government in 1964 and served as a member and president of the State Board of Education from 1975 to 1981. One of the things I observed on coming back is that the relationships between the State Board of Education and the legislature are nowhere near as good as when I left in 1982. I think we have some work to do, and I and my other board members are, I think, going to be very attentive to that relationship in the future. We all answered a 29-question questionnaire from the Senate Rules Committee, and so you have our views about that. We all listed our vision, our priorities in those 29 questions. I merely wanted to mention that among the highest priorities that I have is to ensure that all students are included and emphasized in all our educational improvement efforts. In this regard, the State Board of Education is reworking some of our advisory councils so that students are included in all aspects of curriculum and instruction. Some of them we're reworking include special education, low-income students, and English learners. This reworked advisory structure, for example, on English learners should be completed by November. And to conclude with what I opened with, we will consult with the legislature about this high priority board function. So that's all I want to say in opening, and we're open to your questions.
Thank you. To all the members here, where do you begin and where do you end when it comes to talking about public education and what we need to do together to improve public education? It seems to me that all of us, in one way or another, need to be generalists, but we also need to focus our attention and try to make a big difference in key areas. And the key area for me, no surprise, I've been very public about it, is the lack of connection, in my view, between education and the economy. And I'm not just talking about career technical education, that's a piece of it. But on the one hand, we have the A to G standard, which is the pre-admission standard for the UC and the CSU. It is also the only recognized standard for rigor. And over here, we have CTE and the movement to try to create more room in the class, in the school day, for those kinds of classes. And I'd like to know your overall view of how all this works together, because policymakers here are often confronted with, I wouldn't just say difficult choices, because that's our job, but in some ways I think poor choices. Mr. Furutani, very fine member of the Assembly, has a bill that came before us which suggested that CTE, one course of CTE, ought to be a substitute for one course in foreign language for purposes of graduation requirements. Very well intended. The bill is actually moving with amendments, but how is it that we are forcing our systems and our students to choose between one or the other? I'd like to know your vision for how we have a system in this state of rigorous curriculum that is more relevant to the economy and more career-oriented. In 10 words or less. Go ahead.
You want me
please.
to?
Yes.
Okay. Well, this is a difficult problem. The A to G requirements are set by the Board of Admissions of the University of California. So, and I have met with that body. So you have the college requirements and then set by a selective university in effect. And it has been very difficult for us in California to extend that through the full range of students that we have. I think that we need to take a look at the hard look at the board's prior approved career and technical education standards, which we have, and we need to move forward on looking at what is really the appropriate thing for students who may not be immediately ready and aspiring to a four-year degree. So we need to develop, I think, some alternative pathways. I'm a big fan, for example, of statistics, being in applied statistics, for example. I'm not sure how many levels of mathematics career tech students should have. So, and I don't think that all our problems are going to be solved in this regard by the Common Core, because that level of preparation is really college ready. So it's an area that we have not been able to break through and develop policy, and therefore we have essentially A to G, and then general college prep are really not much. And so I think this area is vital and undeveloped. And we need to work together to do something about it. We're not in a good spot now, in my view.
Ms. Rucker, I know we've worked with you in other settings on these very issues. I'd like to hear your thoughts, please.
Well, you know, whenever we start talking about preparation of students and the outcomes from a K-12 education, we tend to quantify the outcomes from any K-12 system to look at what the scores were on the achievement test, how many students actually went off to college, and now we're trying to also figure out where the other students have gone to. But when you try to paint outcomes with that type of broad brushstroke, what actually gets lost are the more qualitative issues that become important to the students and their parents and the communities that these students actually graduate into. I am very certain that any parent in this room who is sending a student to college hopes that they will finish college and go out and get a job. And for any student who already graduates from high school and chooses to go directly into the workforce, the question is, did they leave high school with the type of marketable or employable skills that they need? The problem is not whether or not we create programs that send students either to college or directly into the workforce. The problem is, are we creating a high school program or a K-12 program that overall gives both students the balanced preparation they need to enter the workforce with the important marketable and employable skills that employers are demanding? That's not the conversation we're having, and I think that that's where it begins. Looking for rigor is very important, and the A to G is a very important metric for defining what rigor looks like. But the other R is also about relevance. We need to understand what is the relevant type of education or instruction that needs to be provided to students. But probably most importantly, what are the relationships the school has in the community it serves? Are there ways that students receive and can be introduced to instruction and education in connection with businesses and the community around them? So when we talk about a 3 R's education, we have to move away from the pure academics of reading and writing and arithmetic and start talking about rigor and relevance and the relationship for the school and the students.
Very good. Let's hear from the other two, and then we'll take it around the horn. Go ahead. Welcome.
Good afternoon. Thank you. I want to just reiterate what we just heard. I do believe that we are struggling with this issue. The issue of rigor, relevance, and relationship are very dear to my heart. This is what we talk to our teachers and staff on a daily basis. How are we going to support them, and how are we going to ensure that we give them opportunities? I do believe that we need to prepare our children to be able to read and write and to be able to be successful in math and continue these A to G requirements. However, we need to give them opportunities and choices. So I agree that we have a lot of work to do and that we have failed to some degree to our students. Thank you.
Thank you. Chairman Ramos?
I think one way of putting everything together is to really look at what it is that higher ed is calling on when students do graduate. And I mean really tackling the issue as far as remedial training at the K through 12. So when students do graduate, they're ready to go on into higher ed with at least the basic freshman math and English. Now, if you get to that point, you're ready to move forward, not only in higher ed to go forward with your degrees and your bachelor's degrees and master's degrees, you're also able to move forward in technical trade. So I think by making it all work together, we have to really look at and articulate the courses that K through 12 is building and the student that we're putting out to move forward in higher education. And that really comes back to early assessment testing and making sure that teachers get those assessment testings back in time so they could do some intervention before those students move forward to graduate.
Thank you. I may have a follow-up or two on this, but let's go around to the members.
Thank
Senator
you.
Ahlquist.
Thank you. First, let me say it's been a pleasure to know Dr. Michael Kurse for 30 years. I've worked on education policy for 21 years in elective office out of my last 28 years between the school board and the legislature. My first question I would like Dr. Kurse and Ms. Rucker to answer, and then the second question I would like Ms. Molina and Mr. Ramos to answer. And my first question is, over the 30-plus years I've been involved in education, there's been a big disconnect between policy and what is actually implemented in the classroom. I don't think things are that different now than they were in 1978 when I moved to California, and that's an oversimplification. So my question is, how will you develop and implement the Common Core standards so that there's not this disconnect, so that how and what teachers teach and how and what students learn is relevant, and that all children have this opportunity to succeed?
Yeah, one of the things I've learned in all these years in education policy is if your policies are not improving classroom instruction, then you're not doing that much. You're basically working with the overhead, and the real game is in the classrooms, as we all know. The Common Core curriculum will be an exceedingly large challenge to put into implementation in the classrooms. State policy can be influential, and I think that our current academic standards and accountability system show that the state can have an impact in the classroom. So the Common Core curriculum is a set of standards. It does not have at this point a curricular framework which guides the strategies for teaching. We will have to work on that. It does not have an assessment that's being worked on with a national consortium. Doesn't have performance standards. How good is good enough to be college and career ready? It doesn't have instructional resources to back it up. We have a moratorium on that, and we really have to develop those. It doesn't have yet a professional development strategy. It doesn't have a pre-service teacher training policy. I can go on with that, but those have to be more coherent, aligned, and effective. We have succeeded somewhat over the past decade in doing this sort of thing, and our rises in California standards test scores show that. So I think we have some handle on what has to be done. It's just a very large task and cannot be underestimated in terms of its overall nature.
Well, it's very clear that the implementation and transition will be a multi-year process. And so as the state continues its deliberations on many of the elements that Dr. Kirst enumerated, districts are asking, well, what should we be doing in the meantime? I think what is different about the adoption of this Common Core from the implementation of our previous academic content standards is that the field in various ways are very aware that there is a date certain that they will be held accountable because we have to implement new assessments. And so the difference for the field is not just to wait for the state to finish its transition plans. There are conversations they need to begin having to ask themselves, having adopted the Common Core, what is the difference in the instructional approaches for teaching English language arts and math? Has the Common Core created a definition or a distinction in that? And the fact that there's a difference, particularly in English language arts, in the balance of fiction and nonfiction, so that students are reading with increasing a significant increase, more technical information, there is a difference in the ways that we approach the instruction in English language arts. And in mathematics, again, what are going to be the relevant differences in the way the math standards define, not math courses, but a sequence of engagement and increasing student proficiency in learning math concepts? I think that those are the kinds of questions that the LEAs and their employees can start talking about now, and those are the significant differences that will help them to engage and make a connection to the plans that the state is developing now.
And for Ms. Molina and Mr. Ramos, what steps can the board take to strengthen teacher workforce and improve teacher quality and to see that we have a better student to counselor ratio?
To improve teacher quality is critical that we provide the professional development so necessary. It begins also to be looking at how we are preparing our teachers at the college, at the entrance level. And furthermore, how we proceed with once they are hired at the district level, and that we continue to provide them with the support so necessary. There is such a learning curve when you come in as a brand new teacher, and we need to continue to support them in that area. In order to continue with the workforce, the more that teachers feel supported, the more teachers feel engaged in the process and they are valued in this process, the more I believe that the workforce will increase. Certainly we need the best possible teachers in our classrooms. And you mentioned the guidance counselors. Also, we need to determine a different way in terms of how we are supporting and assisting those individuals to come into the workforce so that our children will have an opportunity to be guided, particularly with the issues we just discussed. Thank you.
I think one way of strengthening the teachers' workforce is really understanding the environment and culture where the students are coming from so that they can excel in the test and the different programs in academics that's being given in front of them. We have to really strengthen that aspect because not everybody comes from the same environment. There's different environments that happen daily and at nighttime, right? And certainly in San Bernardino and those areas, I know that some students go through those different turmoils at nighttime where the fear of bullets coming through the rooms and all these things. These things are realistic in the daily lives of students. And so educating the teaching workforce as far as being cultural sensitive and the environment where students come from so that we can move forward and understand where it is the students coming and where we need to help them to excel. Because everybody deserves that dream to move forward in education. So we have to be there to understand that. As far as helping with the guidance counselors, I know there's a school district up in Big Bear Lake that has nonprofits, Seroptimus Club, moving forward and really holding fundraisers to fund a guidance counselor for those things. So more business and nonprofit organizations coming together to make education move forward and fill these gaps of the guidance counselors in those areas.
Thank you, Senator Alquist. Senator Fuller? Senator Fuller, have you been involved in education in your...
Here's what I know. Everybody in this room has been involved in education either by being a part of it and attending or having someone went through it. So we all have very strong opinions about education. But mine today has to do with this board, and I'd first have a little just sort of announcement that I don't feel that we've had quite as much time as my caucus and I would like to be able to process, and that's not anybody's fault. That's just that there's never enough time up here. So I'll preface my comments with that what I'll be doing today. Some of you, we tried to meet, we just couldn't make it work out because of the schedule. Some of you I know. So today, my vote will be based on kind of a cursory review of each member and the testimony here today, but I will reserve the right to change my vote when the appointees come up to the floor, because I do believe with some of you will be wanting to do some more work, because it's a very important role. Having said that, I would like to say that I believe the major role that I'm looking for for the board is when to grant flexibility and when to hold people accountable. And that, with the 10-member board, we're going to be looking for the best judgment of all of you together to decide that. The legislature has made many statutes, I think, much less clear, especially with AB 114, on the oversight fiscal problems. And so there will be people coming to you seeking relief. And one of the things that I'll be looking for as I work with you further is, so how can we set up a criteria that determines a fair balance between when to hold an entity accountable and when to be flexible with them? And how do we get the county superintendents inserted back into the whole process of the oversight, because they're going to have a difficult time with some of those new regulations that tie their hands. So the question I've chosen for this, since the Senator Pro Tem has accurately noticed that I might be too lengthy today. Yeah, I'm teasing you, because education is something once I start I can't quit.
Well,
but
it's your passion and your background.
But the question I've decided on for you today, and we'll start with Patricia and work our way around if that's okay, because I know she's brave, is what value do you assign to parent choice options for selecting schools, districts, and programs as a tool to improve student achievement and parent engagement? And how on this board do you believe that you can bring some balance to that issue? Because I think that if we can bring that balance alone, we'll be improving our students, making our parents happier, and actually maybe giving us some peace in the legislature that we wouldn't keep dumping more new regulations on you.
Well, I appreciate you for asking that question. Parent choice has always been a very important element of any decisions that not only parents make about their students, but also in understanding the quality of the education that parents are hoping to guarantee for their students. In small ways, parents already do that, and I know my parents did. My brother and I went through school together in the same grade. We're not twins, and my parents always chose the really rigid, very strict teacher to work with my brother, and I got the free thinker. I hope I turned out okay. So when parents make those decisions, what parent choice helps parents to do is to feel more closely connected to the school that they have chosen, and it creates a kind of an accountability that's just not inherited or imposed on parents. It gives them the accountability that they feel they can be satisfied with, because whether they feel they've actually made a fully informed choice, they feel that they own that choice. So any of the types of parent choice measures that we have, whether it's public school choice, the options for charters, the options to change and restructure the school, what it does is it creates a relationship for many parents that they currently feel they don't have in the schools that they may want to move their child from. So it's probably the most important qualitative metric that we have. But that said, we don't give parents enough of a tool to feel that they can be welcomed to a school, to find out all they need to know, or to get them engaged in ways so that they can learn about school programs and school options. Something as simple as looking for after-school support, or understanding the differences in the types of educational programs in the third grade and the upper grade, or even among all the teachers in a single grade. Those are the things that help parents to make informed decisions. We haven't figured out ways to support them yet. So it's very important to give that option to parents, because it helps parents have that critical relationship that I talked about earlier. And it also gives for parents a sense of ownership and self-engagement, because then they feel that they are monitoring not only their school program, but the school is paying attention to the voice they exercise when they voted with their feet.
Thank you. Did you want the other folks to answer the same question, Senator Fuller?
Do you? We have time.
We've got time. This is...
Dr. Kurtz?
important?
Yes, well, I think parent choice is important, and as you indicated, there's a balance in policy that we have to work out. The board, I think, demonstrated its I would say, acumen in some ways in dealing with the parent empowerment issue. That was an issue which was really very conflicted when it came to us. And our procedure is to hear from various groups, hear from all kinds of individuals and groups, but in the end, to come up with our own view. So what was acted on in that case was the staff draft of the State Board of Education. It wasn't just add up the groups and look at it from that standpoint. So I think we're going to be pragmatic and sensitive, but trying to reach policies that have broad acceptance and allow the statutes to work that underline the idea of parent choice.
Thank you, Ms. Molina.
Thank you. First and foremost is how we begin to support and educate our parents so that they can have the opportunity to make those choices. I truly believe that the parents are the first teacher of every child, and it is our job to give them those opportunities in every direction. How we bring them into our community, into our schools, into whatever situation they decide that they want to participate in. It is our responsibility, I believe, to continue to support them and open the doors so that they can make the best decision for their children. Thank you.
I think that the value that parents add is really is a positive thing for education, because so many times we hear that parents don't want to get involved, but that's been the opposite. As far as serving on this board, I've seen busloads come in of parents to speak to us about issues that come before us. And when you start to look at choices that parents have, if we as a board don't start to recognize that, parents do have a choice. The choice to either come to our school districts or go somewhere else. And that's being clear because of the options that are being put in front of them in the parent empowerment issue that we just went through in establishing those permanent regs. Parents do have a choice, and we have to start listening to those, because we have to know what it is those students need, not just at the school district, but at home. And parents and everybody coming together to make this quality education in the state of California so much better. The parents' voice is so much important to make sure that we are moving in that direction.
Very good. Thank you, Senator Fuller. Senator Harmon, do you have any questions?
Thank you. Yes, I just have one or two very brief questions. The first one deals with the area of evaluating teachers' performance in the classroom. There's been some discussion in the state about rating teachers, giving them a grade card, if you will. We probably would agree that some teachers perform better than other teachers. I accept that. But I was just wondering, I'll start with you, Dr. Crisp. Do you have any thoughts on the process of and adopting some type of process where teachers' performance would be evaluated and rated?
It's very complex, as you know, and there's a balance between, and I think mostly about the state role. This is heavily a local function and should be a local function. And so I see the state role as not being overly prescriptive or detailed on this. We have had the Stull Act for years. It has a lot of strong language in there about teacher evaluation, but yet it hasn't had as much impact as we'd like. So drafting this will be difficult, and I'm watching, frankly, what's going on in some of these other states, and glad that we're not right in the middle of it. Florida has specified that every teacher in every subject in the very short run, that includes, music, phys ed, home economics, whatever, will be judged and primarily on student test scores. And I'm interested to see how they extend that to all teachers in that regard. So I think we do need to rethink our policies. There's a number of bills in the legislature that seem to move the ball forward. But I am, at this point, carefully observing what's going on around the country in order to get some better clues about what the appropriate, detailed, prescriptive state role should be, which I think is a very hard question given that this is a locally operated school system.
As Rucker?
Well, I think that when you talk on the issue of teacher evaluation, the public has a specific stake and an interest in what are the outcomes from that evaluation. And as Dr. Kurtz has pointed out, we've had the STOL Act in place for quite some time, but we really don't get qualitative information reported back to the state or through any public way to explain or share it with the public what is being done to improve and support the improvement of teachers and in their instructional practices. There were a number of legislative proposals that made their way through both houses in this legislative session. I'm not going to comment on those, but they did have policies and ideas that were a step in the right direction to define and carve out a role for the state, and in this case, the ways that the state can report and follow and monitor the types of work and practices in local districts in evaluating and improving their teaching workforce. And I think it's very clear that there is a role the state needs to have in monitoring, in reporting, and in sharing with the public what teacher evaluation means and what the outcomes from those evaluation practices are. And as Dr. Kurtz says, we have to figure out a path that creates a prescription for how we monitor and share information and educate the public on what good evaluation practices look like and what it means, but at the same time give districts a way to address teacher evaluation and engagement and improvement that best matches the priorities in their local context.
Thank you. I believe that every teacher that comes to work comes with the opinion and ready to teach and be successful. I don't believe anyone comes to the classroom without wanting to be successful. How we support in terms of how we evaluate them and in this policy piece is critical, that we are crystal clear of our expectations of them and how we are going to support them throughout this process. So we have some work to do in that we need to be able to understand what are we providing and asking teachers to be able to do, how we're going to be able to hold them accountable for that process, and how we're going to continue to support them through the support that we give them through each of our policies that we put in place.
Thank you. Chairman Ramos?
Yeah, evaluating teachers' performance is something that needs to be done. If we're going to be evaluating students, then also we need to evaluate the whole spectrum, right, teachers included. But along with that, we need to make sure that we're equipping teachers to be able to be successful in what it is they're teaching in the classroom. So we have to make sure that all this flows together. Certainly there has to be accountability, because at the end of the day, it's the student that comes in and their first dialogue with education is with that teacher. So we have to make sure that there is accountability there, that the student is being taught and proficiently and that quality education is there. But we also have to make sure that we're equipping the students or the teachers to make sure they have the means to move forward in what it is we're doing there. So in this evaluation process, certainly it needs to be done, but we have to look at the successful attributes to that too, for the student and for the teacher, to make sure that it's a quality education for all.
All right, thank you very much. I did have one question just for Ms. Rucker. Ms. Rucker, I'm directing it to you because of your long involvement and employment with the California Teachers Association. You were, I believe, title was legislative advocate or something like that. I just wanted to, you and I talked about this when you came to my office, whether you believe you could have a fair and impartial approach to the issues that you would see on the board. Is that still something you think that would be attainable?
Thank you very much for asking that. And we did have a good conversation, and I think that we talked not only about my role, but also the fact that I'm not the first employee of the California Teachers Association who served on the board. My predecessor from that would have been Joe Nunez, and he served on the board for 5 years. I think he did a very credible job, and he was a very good role model on not only collaboration, but the work of bringing together conversations in the stakeholder community. And so while that is my job, I also believe that in the time I have spent on the board this year, I have demonstrated very ably my ability to separate my obligations to the work that I do for CTA to the obligations I have to the education community at large.
Is it ever necessary for you to recuse yourself from voting on issues that might conflict with your prior involvement with the Teachers Association?
Well, the recusal is not because it conflicts with some policy or opinion that CTA has. I'm required by the law to recuse if there's a direct financial relationship that the decision might have from my employer. And so, yes, there have been times when I've had to recuse on decisions of the board because they do have a direct financial impact on my employer.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I'm going to turn over to Senator De Leon. I have to leave for a few minutes. We'll get back as quickly as I can. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Pro Tem. I do want to add, just right before you leave, Mr. Pro Tem, I just do want to recognize your strong leadership on the issue of education, especially when it comes to vocational education. And I know that you had a measure last year dealing with regards the RIFs, obviously, which was an issue that, as controversial as it was an issue that it was well deserved with regards to debating and arguing. Let me add that I enjoyed very much our meeting today with all the nominees for appointment for the State Board of Education. And an issue that I care deeply about is the whole issue of what everyone calls the achievement gap. I don't call it the achievement gap. I call it the opportunity gap, obviously, because these are children who mostly are relegated to certain zip codes throughout the state of California who attend lower decile schools who, by no fault of their own, but by no fault of their own, again, they're just been given a very difficult set of circumstances, whether it's overcrowded schools, the least experienced teachers, and I think it goes on and on and on with that. It's almost akin to an emergency room center at a county hospital, where it's the most crowded, most experienced, a lot of trauma. There's parallels with that in a lot of urban school districts. In fact, even with some of the rural school districts. So I do truly believe it is an opportunity gap. I don't think any child, regardless of who they are, where they're born, whether it's in Hillsborough, Burlingame, or La Jolla, California, Pacific Palisades, or in Palo Alto, that they are innately much more intelligent than any other child. They just don't have, they've been given better opportunities than the other individual. So this is going to be an open-ended question for Dr. Kearse, Ms. Rucker, Chairman Ramos, and Ms. Molina. Give me, and this is a bigger question, and I don't think your answer would be the panacea. I don't believe that there is some magic silver bullet that's going to somehow, some way close the opportunity gap, but perhaps there are a lot of magic silver BBs that, shot together somehow, some way will make a major dent in how we close this opportunity gap, which in my opinion is one of the biggest civil rights issues that we deal with today, because the ramifications are very pronounced as how it impacts the state budget, because there is a direct correlation with regards to social services, whether it comes to pregnancies, whether it comes to the correctional facilities, whether it comes to WIC program or what CalWorks, and the list goes on and on and on. So what do we do as a state, as members of the State Board of Education, to put into place, a series of, whether we want to call it reforms, or whatever measures, to start narrowing that opportunity gap? And I know whether it's class size reduction, whether it's better teacher development and training, whether it's stronger administrative leadership, because at times, yes, we can have very weak leadership. At the same time, we have members in the profession who frankly don't belong there. They belong in another profession. We have a lack of parental involvement for a whole variety of reasons. We know some work, very hard to make ends meet and pay the roof over their head and pay the rent, put the food on the table. Many of them are not educated. Many of them are intimidated. Administration, at times, it's not a very welcoming environment. There's a whole variety of factors that come into play. But just an open-ended question. Give me a couple ideas off the top of your head. What you believe would have a major impact with regards to closing this opportunity gap. We'll start with you, Doctor.
Okay, yes. Well, as you know, and I won't answer it this way, it starts in preschool and goes through all the grades and all of that, but you're trying to hone. Well, if you look at the studies that have been done, Education Trust has done some of them, EdSource has done some of them, I participated in that, you find schools that are closing this gap significantly. We have many in California, and they're spread throughout. And again, they seem to be heavily focused, I believe all students can learn. They're heavily focused on the outcomes on the state tests that are required. They involve a lot of collaborative work among teachers, where they check up with each other. They use data well. They have various incentives, and they have a school culture that we can do it. Those are some of the attributes. The challenge is really, how do you take this relative handful of schools and scale those up to the whole state? I don't know that state policy has the levers, if you will, to do that. And so it involves, I think, also local collaboratives and other things of that sort. But I think the answer is to build on what we know and figure out how to get that up there in large scale, because we have these examples, but yet they continue to be relatively small. Lastly, I would say that to truly close an opportunity gap, you'd have to go beyond our state testing. Our state testing, to me, is antiquated. It's all closed-end multiple choice tests. We want these students to succeed in college and career preparation after they leave high school. They need a much richer set of goals and assessments that are really geared to college. I think implementing the Common Core curriculum will help with this, and that would be my second response, that finally has us on the track of what would it take to succeed beyond high school and beyond minimum high school graduation testing.
Well, I'll begin by saying it's really important to have very rigorous and high expectations. We hear the platitude all the time that a high tide raises all boats, but the fact of the matter is, as you have pointed out, we ain't all in the same harbor. One of the things that we have to look at, and Dr. Kurz pointed this out in talking about the system, we have to understand that there has to be a type of reciprocal accountability. It's not enough to isolate the responsibility of students to perform, but the system also needs to hold itself responsible and accountable for the decisions it makes in support of the school.
Who's the system in this case?
The system in this case, and I'll keep it just at the local level. When you look at a single high school district, and I'll stay in my backyard rather than your district, such as the San Juan Unified School District, we need to ask the district to ask a simple question. Why is it that there are more advanced placement courses at one of your high schools, say Rio Americano, but not the same ability to offer the same level of advanced placement access, say, at Encina High School? That's the type of systems, reciprocal accountability that needs to be done. We are not asking the right questions in holding our systems accountable for the local instructional decisions we make, and we are not creating a guide or a model for how to do that. So that would be the first thing, understanding we need to set rigorous expectations and expect rigorous outcomes, but it doesn't just come down at the granular level to the individual student. The second element that I think we have to think about in accountability, as Dr. Kirst also pointed out, we need to change what it is we think about when we talk about student testing. Assessment should not be about what a student can remember. It should be, are we understanding, or is the student being given an opportunity to demonstrate the behaviors that are observable to show us he understands how to figure out the answer, or how to use and consume information and develop an answer. We're not doing those types of assessments. We give lip service to performance-based assessments or standards-aligned assessments, or making sure that we give students a chance to demonstrate what they know, but we treat all students the same way. And so then the best example I can give is in looking at the changes that we're anticipating in how we teach, how we assess English and for reading language and math, looking at reading and writing assessment. When you ask a student who is a non-English speaker with a simple test variation to respond to the writing assessment, I'm very certain if he's allowed, if he understands how to read and write in his own language, he can come up with an essay in his own language. But if we're asking a student to listen and speak as part of the assessment, That variation for an English learner cannot be the same, but we are not figuring out what those differences should be. And again, it's the reciprocal accountability. We're not asking the test vendors to tell us that either. And then probably the most important thing on the assessments, we cannot use one test to tell us multiple things. If the test is going to tell us how well the student is doing, can it also tell us whether or not the textbook we picked was the correct textbook, or if the instructional strategies that were used were the correct instructional strategies, or if class size reduction worked, or if we gave them enough money. We have to figure out other metrics to tell us that. We cannot use one assessment or one metric to tell us all things validly.
All right, thank you, Ms. Ruck.
We can all agree that there is not one size fits all. And I believe that if you go and visit schools in a variety of places, that you will see success in many, many places. Things that we see that keep repeating are how well teachers are prepared for the profession, how we professionally develop and collaborate with each other in the classroom, how we look at the data and analysis, not just assessments, as we've heard members speak just a few minutes ago, but specifically, what do we know about the whole child? I truly believe that we can't teach the child that we don't know. So we need to spend more time about asking ourselves, who is the child in front of us? How are we supporting them, and how are we providing the instruction necessary for them to be successful? And that requires teachers to be knowledgeable about the child, all the child. It requires teachers to understand their curriculum and to know how to deliver that curriculum. It requires teachers to collaborate with each other and have a conversation on a daily basis about the child. And it requires the team and administrators to support them in this process. It is not an easy task, but is definitely something that we can all do together. And more importantly is, how do we involve and help educate the parent to help us in this process? They play a critical part in this situation. And I believe that if we spend more time helping our teachers understand this process and working with our administrators and going to our communities and working with them, that we could be able to at least begin to have some strong dialogue.
Thank you, Ms. Molina.
Yeah, I think, one thing we have to look at in the state of California is 2/3 of the students in K through 12 are of color. Right, so we have to look at what it is that we're doing and what it is the regulations and the accessibility and accountability we're putting on the administration. When we start to look at scores like API scores that are high, right, and then the students, when they start to not show up at school, sometimes there's not that outreach to get those students back in there because the API score starts to drop. We have to maybe look at re-looking at how that API score is derived and put more weight on those students that don't show up, go out and get them, bring them in, and put more weight on that improvement there. I think everybody in education, going to education, wants the right to succeed, right? But how do you get from point A to point B when you're the first in your family to move forward to get that high school diploma, to go on to higher ed? So I think it's the structure. It's not so much of the will of the student moving forward. And again, it's the environment and the culture that students come from. Maybe that the life that's in that environment isn't pushing that education to move forward. So when those students don't show up, I think more of a improvement and a weighted score of going out and engaging in those students, bringing them back into the fold and working with them to make sure that they do move forward to graduate.
Thank you very much, Chairman Ramos. Let me add one follow-up question, and let me direct this toward Dr. Kurtz, since you've been in this for a very long time, and I know that you're Professor Emeritus at Stanford University. You talked about, we have examples, shining lights, beacons of hope in the most distressed environments up and down the state of California, whether it's East LA, East Oakland, Santa Ana, wherever it may be, East Palo Alto. You've talked about scaling it up to different economies of scale. You mentioned collaboration, focused on outcomes. There's a clear focus that there's a philosophy that every child, regardless of their financial circumstances, regardless of the background of their parents or educational background, that every child that walks into that classroom campus, there's a philosophy from top to bottom, bottom to top, that child can succeed, period, regardless of gender, color, immigration status, and that every child can learn. What are the obstacles to scaling it up? It's a very simple question I'm asking, but I know it's a very complex answer. are we part of the obstacles, or is it the local governance structures part of the obstacles? What is it? Is it a combination thereof? I know that there's a lot of blame to be issued. I'm not asking to do that and pinpoint, highlight that, but why can't we scale up? If we see some school in the middle of a sea of lower decile schools, but somehow, some way, they're getting it right, and they're not cherry picking either. And it's not these kids are getting on a school bus and traveling 1 hour within the city because they're going to a school that is in a high-income zip code district, and somehow, some way, through metamorphosis, we believe that academically they're going to improve. Somewhat. What is it? Why can't we scale it up? In a broader manner.
It's partly a matter of expectations, but and as you indicated, I'm going to pass on that. I think the main thing I would say to you is I get back to, if you're not improving classroom instruction, you're not doing much in improving education. I don't think that the local educators in many cases have the capacity to do this. The state's answer is more accountability, more sanctions, more data. That's what we pile on. What we don't have is a strategy for building up the capacity of the administrators and the teachers in those settings. So, in how, for example, they diagnose their students, what data they use, and here's one of the key things, how they reteach what students aren't getting. What we're getting to in Common Core and the future developments on this board is, if you're not getting it, how do I handle that? A lot of educators don't really know how, even if they have the diagnosis, making you understand it is difficult. And
give me an example.
Well, you're not getting fractions, and I approach this in a variety of ways, and I can't quite figure out why you aren't getting fractions or solving an equation or something like that. And our current teaching methods are often still very abstract. The students don't quite understand it. One of the biggest surprises I had in coming back after 1982 is there's no more in the technology in the classrooms in use every day than when I left. There may be less because they've stuffed students to the walls and have removed the PCs. So
one of the confusing conundrums I think we find ourselves in is that technologically speaking, we've advanced so far, we're through the stratosphere, yet the opportunity gap is actually getting wider. Yeah. It's not getting smaller. And we live in a society today that perhaps a few generations ago, a high school diploma would suffice. You get a good union job, work at an assembly plant somewhere, and that was enough for you to pay a mortgage, send your kid off to college if he or she did well. We live in a society today that's most pernicious, that the limited education that you have, you'll be punished most severely in today's society, ironically speaking. So with technology and the laptops and everything else and iPads, actually, it's getting worse as we speak.
Well, yeah, that is true, and I think I don't see how we can solve this solely without using more technology in some ways. We have to have what they mixed presentations with the teacher standing up there, and then more exciting dynamic technology. I don't think it can be just all right, one way.
We're running a little long here, and if it would be all right with you, Senator De Leon, we'll move on this. Now, I think the plan is we have now had these 4 nominees, and we're now going to go to the next 3 nominees. So we will excuse you from your seats. Don't leave. The show's not over. And then we'll have the next 3 nominees, and then after they make their presentation and questions from the committees, then we will go to witnesses in support and witnesses in opposition. Is that the pleasure of the committee? Good, thank you. All right, thank you very much for your presentations. And at the next 3 nominees, we have Dr. Carl Cohen, we have Dr. Eileen Strauss, and Trish Williams. So we're going to change the name tags. And I understand that Assemblywoman Brownlee would like to make an introduction of one of these nominees. Would you like to come forward and do that now?
May I just use this microphone?
Yes, you may. Thank you.
Well, I really appreciate the opportunity. I actually wasn't expecting it, but it is with great privilege for me to be here in support of Dr. Eileen Strauss. I've worked with her for many, many years. I haven't known her my whole life, but I know her 30-plus year history in education, and she is one that is very committed to children and their success in school, and I think is a very experienced and talented educational leader, as she has demonstrated as being a principal, middle school principal, as well and the central administration of a school district in terms of building scale and making classrooms where full attention around teaching and learning and ensuring children are successful in school. So it's
thank you very much, and we appreciate your patience in waiting to make that statement. Now I think we'll go to the nominees, and we'll just start on my left with you, Dr. Strauss, if you would, please. You may make your opening statement. If you have people you want to introduce that are here with you, that's all right, too. No? Wait a minute.
Sorry, Mr. Chairman, they provided written statements in advance.
Oh,
so
okay.
We can go straight to questions.
Go straight to questions. Thank you very much.
I do think all of our families are probably in spirit watching us during this, but we're all here, I think, with our families.
We're going to actually start with questions from committee members, and I'll just go around the horn if that's okay, and I'll start with Senator Alquist. Are you prepared? Thank you, Senator.
Thank you. We talked about the achievement gap. Senator DeLeon mentioned that, and as a former high school teacher and K through 12 guidance counselor, I certainly think there's a relationship between the achievement gap and the dropout rate. But I want to focus even more on the dropout rate, because that certainly has not improved. And in my conversation with Mr. Ramos this morning, he made a very interesting comment, and that was, because I said, I think there are a lot of students who drop out in the last 6 months of high school even. And he suggested that when that happens, that perhaps there are times their scores are not included on the API scores, and therefore it's not a reflection of a school district and how well all the students are doing. And of course, up here and throughout this room, we're interested in every single student. So I would ask Dr. Cohn if you could give us some ideas on what do we really need to do differently so that students do not drop out.
Actually, I'm not surprised by increases in dropout rates. I think when you look at times as what's going on in our schools, the extent to which we've adopted this one-size-fits-all approach to everything, that there are a lot of youngsters that aren't going to fit with that. I still think terms like vocational education are not necessarily a bad draconian idea. I think we've got to look at kids where they are, and we've got to provide choices and opportunities for them. I worked in 2 very tough high schools, Dominguez High School in Compton and then at Long Beach Poly High. And I think the more you make it solely 100% about English language arts and mathematics, and then judge that completely by an obsession with standardized testing, dropout rates could go even higher. So I'm not one. The other thing that's a reality is that the older youngsters get, the more they make choices, and some of those choices are poor choices. It doesn't mean, though, that the schools shouldn't work harder and do more to keep kids in school. But dropout, tough issue, and is going to be with us until we sort of abandon the notion that one size doesn't fit all and actually provide opportunities for all the kids who come to school.
Thank you. My next question, I've asked all these questions of all the nominees, and so I'm just sort of picking one as we go. For Ms. Williams, who's from my district, I would say, as a board member, what do you want to do to ensure that students throughout California are prepared to go to college? And I think there are a number of students, and I've been very supportive of career tech, so I don't want to say that I'm just college-oriented. It's both. But for those who do want to go to college, what are you going to do differently that hasn't really been done yet, or to see that they get to go? What are you going to advocate for?
I think you may be asking this because as you and I talked, and Senator DeLeon and I talked, we're the first in our families to have gone to college. And so while I have a long base of experience in education policy, statewide education policy, and a lot of intellectual knowledge about it and practical knowledge about it, what really drives me is the fact that I was able to make that leap for my family and go to college. And in part, it was because I had some teachers reach out to me. I didn't have good guidance counseling, but I did have some teachers who picked me out and believed in me, and that was really, really important. I agree with Carl Cohen that there needs to be more choices in high school than we have now, that there needs to be more robust programs. I believe in a portfolio of high school kinds of options for students because I do think they make choices. I also agree with the people who want to make sure that there aren't any doors closed, that every student is prepared to make choices. They have as many options open as possible because sometimes, I know even in my own family, in ninth grade, what you think you want to do turns out to be very different 4 years later in 12th grade when maybe you've hopefully matured more. And so not closing options out for kids in ninth grade, but they have as many options open as possible. So I would support a portfolio approach to a lot of different high school options for kids. The Common Core standards are supposed to, when they say college ready, what they mean is ready to enter community college without the need for remediation, or ready to enter if you get into 4-year without the need for remediation. It does not mean you're qualified to get into a UC system. It means ready to go without the need for remediation. And even that's an important big step. That would be a huge step in California if that were the case. So I think if they have more options in high school, if high school is more interesting to them, my older son had to have a lot of hands-on visual arts film experiences. My younger son took double math courses and science courses, and that was what was interesting to him. I think if you have choices, it keeps them in and keeps them interested. But I also think that guidance counseling is, we're the 50th. We rank 50th in the nation in terms of the number of guidance counselors per student. And I think it's very difficult, especially if your family has not been to college. If you're in a family where the parents have never gone to college, it is a foreign country. You can't even imagine what it's like. Sometimes you can't imagine how to get in. The truth is, I went to the private liberal arts college in my hometown because I didn't know how to apply to the state school. And I was lucky that they gave me grants and loans. So guidance counseling for students who help them tap into their own talents, know what they might be able to do with them, and then help them figure out how they're going to get from where they are into a university and how they're going to then acclimate once they get at that university, I think is really critical.
Thank you. As the daughter of a Greek immigrant tavern owner who graduated from 6th grade in Greece but knew 6 languages, and mother who finished high school in America, I had no clue in the beginning how to get through the maze. So I really relate to what you say. My question for Dr. Strauss is, and I'll try and put it into one question because it's part of what we talked about and then a little bit of what Dr. Kurtz mentioned. More is going to be expected of teachers.
Right.
And they're already doing way too much. Mm-hmm. So as we learn new things, how will you as a board member work to implement the standard core curriculum so that we have teachers who understand that students learn in different ways, that there are different learning styles, that there are things about children we need to learn in the beginning as soon as they enter the schools, and that continues with them over time. So that's part of the question, and given we don't have very much time, I'll just leave it at that if you would like to answer that.
Let me answer that. I feel so strongly that what happens in the classroom, as Dr. Kirsch said, makes all the difference for kids. And it is a mediating factor that will really make a difference for students who don't have some of the opportunities as they come to us. So to me, the investment in quality teacher practice and the ongoing professional development and growth is essential if we're going to improve our practice. That being said, those of us who work in education, you have a lot of energy. You have so much for a day, that's all you can do. You have to do it differently. You can't do more. And I would say teachers come to work and they work hard. And so what we have to help people know is that we want you to keep working hard, we want you to care about our kids, but we want you to think about it and practice in a different way. So the investment in Common Core not only has to be the development of curriculum materials and frameworks and models to train teachers, we've got to give investment in time for teachers to learn the differences, to model, to be coached, and to practice collaboratively together. How am I going to teach this English language arts class at 9th grade in a different way? And what does a common assessment look like that'll tell me to practice differently? All my experiences for 23 years of leading schools in very diverse LA County school districts was when you invest in quality teaching and make a difference in the classroom, opportunities increase, achievement goes up, and the gap begins to narrow. And that's my bias. So I actually participate on the Common Core work group. I think I'm also a liaison to Department of Ed, as many of us are on different areas on accountability. And so I help think about, let's see, I've been an elementary, middle, high school principal and an assistant superintendent at the district level in curriculum. So we want to do this policy. Now, how are we going to get it out to county offices, out to school districts, to assistant superintendents, to principals, and to teachers? What's the rollout? And to remember that just because we develop it at the state, the capacity that we build, the investment in teacher and leader capacity so that we implement it is where it's going to make. Otherwise, it's going to be another wonderful document on the shelf. So my commitment is really to help the implementation and the rollout really get to the classroom practice.
So if we have a child, and as I say this as someone who in her first year of teaching was I taught second-year algebra, basic math, trigonometry, and was also a 10th grade guidance counselor. And my teacher training consisted basically of my teacher saying, Elaine, just pull up the blinds or something like that.
Here's the book.
So let's say we have a child who is really having a hard time with fractions. Mm-hmm. And that this child really needs to understand that concept in order to move forward in mathematics. Mm-hmm. And we know that the greatest correlation for college success is second-year algebra. Mm-hmm. But this child's got to do the fractions, right. and she or he just isn't getting it. Mm-hmm. The teacher's getting frustrated, and the child's getting frustrated, and pretty soon the child doesn't want to come to school, is feeling bad, and so what do we do?
So first, let me just say, the ongoing assessment's really important. What we learn in the spring is one thing that gets reported in the fall, but teachers have to have opportunities to get the assessment, to take a look at how all their third graders did, and then to meet collaboratively with all the teachers at their grade level, look at their test scores, at their data, and then talk about how are we intervening and remediating. So one person can't know all the answers for everything. So what I have found is the most professional practice is to bring teachers together in professional learning communities. They analyze the data, they share best practice, they watch each other teach, and they talk about that, and then we supplement it with technology, which helps to differentiate in a way that maybe every teacher doesn't have every way to approach it. But it is the investment in collaboration that's going to make the difference.
Thank you. I'm not going to ask a follow-up question. It's fascinating, but I will say I hope you bring this kind of spirit
absolutely
to the board.
I will.
Thank
I will
you.
continue to.
All right, let's move on to Senator Fuller.
Well, I'm going to try to shorten this a bit, but what leadership tools or skills will you use to lead school personnel to adopt successful models of student achievement, especially those that come to ask for an exemption as an in-run to one of the statutes or their responsibilities, and it becomes apparent to you that that's the case.
Who are you asking?
I'll start with any one of you, and basically it's a simple question, and when you're sitting on the board, someone comes, you begin to understand that they're using the exemption request process as an end run, and they haven't done enough. How would you lead them to taking a more successful tack?
Are you talking about waivers and people coming before the state board for waivers when clearly it's an end run as opposed to a legitimate sort of concern? Beyond ultimately voting no on the idea, as a sidebar, I think I would want to say, if this is something that's important, then you want to think very clearly about the role model that you're providing as a superintendent or a school board member or a chief business and financial officer who's coming and seeking that waiver. But if it's a small matter and it's something in statute that we absolutely have to decide, and one of the examples I've been citing is a small rural school district at our May meeting coming before us and asking for a waiver on feeding kids during the summer. And for that superintendent, it was a choice between having summer school. That's all the money they had was for summer school. They didn't have enough money to feed the kids. I would vote in favor of granting that kind of a waiver as opposed to a more substantive matter on student performance.
I think we're 6 months into the state board activity, this new state board, and in terms of looking at the waivers and what the requests are for, I think that I personally have some continued growth in that area in terms of thinking through, do I understand what, like your comment about it being an end run? The waiver requests that appear to me to be legitimate requests that would yield flexibility in funding where resources could be, let's say class size reduction, where resources could be used in a different way and they're in a really tight financial situation, feel to me like legitimate requests. Waivers, if I were entertaining a waiver that appeared to be a way to get around accountability for student outcomes, then that would not be one that I would feel comfortable automatically approving. That I'd have to know exactly what that was about and what was leading to it to see whether or not it felt like there was something I'm overlooking, that it could be legitimate. But that's the kind that I would be inclined not to approve.
So my response in that area is that when I look at the waivers, I've lived the school practice of it. So many of the questions that the board members come from a variety of perspectives, and we have actually passed some waivers through that are flexibility, as Trish said, and that allows some class size waiver. They have union and local support. And we've actually questioned quite a bit. Some of the people who come before the board have sent some districts back to the district to do more. We've delayed it to another board agenda and asked them to come back with more information. And so I think this board are experienced educators in a variety of settings and are very thoughtful about it. And so we've been very thorough in looking at the waivers, looking at those. Is it a case load for a resource specialist for a school? Is it not enough training for a translator for a deaf and hard of hearing child? Or is it something that's going to exceed 35-1 in a classroom that we know is not sound and doesn't have union support? And so I think what you have with this board, and I certainly would say this voice, we evaluate it carefully. We've asked a lot of questions, and we've put it off if we needed to have them come back and present more information before we make a decision. Mm-hmm.
All right, thank you very much, Senator De Leon. You have a brief question for these nominees and brief responses, please.
Yes,
thank
sir.
you.
Brief questions, very detailed and long answers, I'm expecting. No. Same question that I asked the first panel. Some thoughts, ideas with regards to how we, in fact, close this, or at least radically narrow the opportunity gap.
There is some emerging research on those districts that have done a better job of bringing these kinds of reforms to scale. A woman named Heather Zavodsky has written a book called Bringing Reform to Scale, and it chronicles the changes that are going on in the districts that have won the Broad Prize. And both Long Beach and Garden Grove have won the Broad Prize. And part of this is in fact setting high standards. I believe that good schools, whether public, whether regular public, charter, or private schools, speak beyond just student performance. They speak to a whole culture of values. So you have a situation where, for example, in the early 90s, the Long Beach Board said, Long Beach youngsters ought to dress better, behave better, and achieve more. And your job, Mr. Superintendent, is to make sure that that happens. And part of that culture of setting high standards ultimately ends up in significant gains in student achievement, the thing that we're constantly measuring. But I would argue that whether it's KIPP or any other charter company that's working better, they're extremely proud of the fact that the youngsters are in uniforms. They take great pride in the fact that they set higher behavior standards than other schools. And yes, over time, the student achievement gains go up. The caution that I would argue or offer is that in my own 10-year experience in Long Beach, the really big gains in student achievement went up years 5 through 10. Mm-hmm. And today's current accountability system often doesn't give leaders that amount of time to realize those gains. This is difficult, hard, painstaking work, and anybody who suggests you can have a dramatic turnaround in a year or two is probably going to end up like the scandal in Atlanta. This is hard work. It takes time. The payoff is huge, and I would argue that there is more
Let's
research
try to wrap it up, if we could, please,
being
Dr.
done.
Vaughn. Thank you. Briefly.
Okay, I'll see how quickly I can do this by not repeating everything that's been said before about what kinds of things contribute to closing the achievement gap. I think it probably might be, I really loved your phrase, a bunch of silver, not bullets, but BBs. I liked that. But I'm going to reinforce what Carl just said. I know there's a lot of talk about the teacher in the classroom, and I agree with all of that. But a couple of studies that have been done by EdSource in the last 5 years, with me as the project lead and Mike Kirst as the academic principal investigator. The last study we did on gaining ground in the middle grades, we had 303 schools, 3,570 teachers, and 157 superintendents answer very lengthy surveys. And part of what we found, there were many findings we had about the schools that outperformed the lower performing schools with similar students. But key to it was accountability from the top to the bottom. From the school board who said this is what's important, student outcomes are important, and here are the myriad of ways that we're going to tackle it, from from whether it's uniforms, parent contracts, pride, having banners in the classroom from universities, setting a kind of tone, teacher professional development, but it started with the school board. The superintendents who answered those surveys reported that they were held accountable by their school boards, and many of them that their compensation was tied to improve student outcomes. The principals in the higher performing schools said that they were held accountable for student outcomes in their annual evaluations. And so it started at the top. It was strong. It was relentless. It wasn't mean-spirited. It wasn't tough, but everybody in the entire school and in the entire districts where they were outperforming knew what the expectations were and were trying everything possible to make it happen.
Let me ask you a quick question, Ms. Wilson. You're talking about financial compensation, and it's tied to performance. Is that everybody?
That was superintendents. Yes.
So let me say that my 23 years of leading schools, and 20 of them at the second 20 years leading secondary schools, the focus has always been on improving instruction and achievement and narrowing that opportunity gap. And it begins to show much stronger in the middle and in the high school. And so what I believe is building on what Dr. Cohen said and what Ms. Williams said, which is it is about a culture of expectation that's set from the top, and it is important that everybody owns it. So yes, the superintendent and the school board, but absolutely the principal focuses on it and the teachers. So for example, when you hire teachers into a school, the hiring process reflects what the values and expectations are. And then the monitoring and retention of teachers talks about the culture, the tone, the caring that goes on in that classroom. And I would say as our middle and high schools get bigger and bigger, my middle school is almost 1,400 and my high school was close to 3,500, the personal connection for kids as life begins to get in the way and distract them with all the things, we have to keep telling kids, we care about you, we believe in you, and you can do it. Now, giving kids opportunity at the secondary level to explore career and technical opportunities as well as college rigorous preparatory courses is important, but not to sell them short too early. And I think the area of guidance and counseling and personal connection and outreach to kids and their families to say, you can go to college, you absolutely can do this, you should take this course, not letting the system sell kids short is going to be very, very important. So it does build on what all three of us are saying, that the entire system has to be linked together.
Go ahead, Senator Harman.
I'm going to pass on questions. I think that everything that I've heard from these nominees answers the questions that I had, although I would tell Dr. Cohen, as myself being a graduate of Long Beach Woodrow Wilson High School.
Did it work?
And I heard that you're from Pauley, our enemy, who always won football games when I went to high school there. We'll have to see about this. But anyway, Mr. Chair, I think all the members have asked questions, and it's, if you have some, then I think it's appropriate. And we'll go to witnesses and
very good. Thank you very much, Senator Harman. I want to apologize. I had to go see the governor about some other important matters, but few things are more important than this. And I know there's nothing worse than a guy coming in at the end of the conversation and then trying to, But I did hear just one thing from Dr. Strauss at the very end that I want to, that just kind of caught my attention. And I might have heard it wrong.
Okay.
But when talking about career and college, you said something to the effect of we can't give up too early on kids in thinking about going to college, if that's the way that I heard it. And I just want to reinforce again, just as one member of the legislature and leader of the Senate, that I urge the board not to get caught in a competition between college and career. That's what's missing. That's what's happening in this building, in this debate. And it's why the chairman expressed his frustration at the very beginning about how far behind we are when it comes to when it comes to integrating, having an integrated system. The point of the matter is that if we had more rigorous applied curriculum in high school, a young person would be able to get excited about a career, even a technical career, and then all of a sudden say, wow, I want to go to college, and have done the prerequisites to be able to do it. And so, to me, excuse me for my over-enthusiasm here, but this is the issue which this board and our legislature and the governor need to grasp. This is about not just evaluating who teaches, but it's about what are we teaching here? Not really relevant enough. But you don't have to sacrifice the rigor to get the relevance. And I heard that and I wanted to just editorialize. Thank you. Let's hear from witnesses in support. We're going to ask Senator Huff, I'm sorry, who has been waiting most patiently, sir, and I apologize, to come on up and offer his testimony. It doesn't work. Let's see. I think this. It doesn't work. Yeah, that's okay. Do my job when this stuff runs out. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members. Certainly education is one of our highest priorities by virtue of the general fund. It is our highest priority because we spend over 50% of our budget on education. Every administration is expected to have a plan for education and indeed to make appointments to help implement his or her vision and plan. And we see that before us today. Part of our checks and balances on the appointments is we in the Senate have an opportunity to weigh in through rules meetings like this and ultimately a vote on the floor. To the degree that education is such an important decision, it rises to the threshold of a 2/3 vote. And it is in that light that I come to you before you today. When the governor made his appointments, there were some concerns raised in our caucus about that. We entered into dialogue with the governor, with his chief of staff, with Dr. Kirst, and we've had a good conversation along the way. I've been encouraged by many of the questions asked today and the answers. It's clear that all of these appointees have a passion for education and bring a diverse background to the board. Having said that, we still have some questions to be answered. These appointments are not necessary at this time. We still have till January to make these appointments or to confirm the appointments, according to my understanding. And so I would respectfully like to ask that we hold the appointment of Dr. Kirst and Patricia Rucker until a little bit later, and without prejudice, because I think they're fine people, but just as a way to not hold up the bulk of the appointments, but to just weigh in that there are still some things that we need to have resolved to, and we believe we will get there.
Senator Huff, I really appreciate, obviously, your interest in public education. I know it's a lead policy area for you and coming forward to the committee. I think your request for some more time is reasonable, but I would put the time frame as a matter of a couple of days as opposed to January, because we would like to wrap up these nominees up or down before the end of this session on September the 9th. And so I know I've spoken with the governor and his staff about making sure that you're able to express any concerns over the next couple of days so that we can get this done well before the 9th of September.
And I hope we can as well. Some of these things may take time because it would perhaps involve a policy that is adopted by the board. I'm not sure that can happen within the next few days, yet this is something that has been requested since January. So while time is sort of evaporating now, it is not because of anything or lack of ability on our part or of communication.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Thank you.
Appreciate it. Thanks, members.
Thank you. Witnesses in support of the nominee. Again, given the late hour, it's almost midnight.
Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, Paula Treat on behalf of the Pechanga Band of Luiseño Mission Indians. Senator? Oh, Paula Treat on behalf of the Pechanga Band of Luiseño. of Luiseno Mission Indians in support of James Ramos. Chairman Ramos is not only the leader of a great nation, he is a strong believer in a better education and making it the best and the most exciting it can be. We thank the governor's office for the diversity of appointing more Native Americans and congratulate them on such a good choice. Hope for approval. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Catherine Valenzuela with Public Advocates, here to express support for our long-term partners, Dr. Kearse, Ms. Rucker, and Ms. Williams, and to express our optimism as we develop relationships with Chairman Ramos, Ms. Molina, Dr. Strauss, and Dr. Cohn. We really are very pleased with the diversity of perspectives on this panel. We think that their deep knowledge and their commitment to community input is really valuable, and we're really excited about the potential they have as a board. We think it's one thing to believe in opportunity to learn both college and career, and it's something much different to actually implement the policies, the regulations, and the practices necessary to make that happen. We feel this board has what it takes to do their job well and urge you to confirm their appointments. Thank you.
Sherry Griffith with the Association of California School Administrators. We urge your confirmation of all 7 appointees today. We have monitored the votes of each of these members over the last 8 months, and we've reviewed all of the background and feel 100% confident that this is actually the strongest slate of appointees we have seen in over 15 years. What you have in this combination of appointees is the on-the-ground experience. You have teachers and leaders of schools and districts. You have research experience, business and civic leadership, and higher education. We added up the numbers of years of experience of this group. It's over 200 in the education world. We think that's pretty phenomenal. Every single appointee, in our view, is deeply committed to public schools, and in the last 8 months we have noticed that they are extremely thoughtful, collaborative, inclusive, and the discussion was as rich every single meeting as it was today. We feel that all 7 appointees will provide an immense contribution to the children of California, and we urge their support.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, members, Jerome Encinas on behalf of the Rincon Band of Luiseno Indians, the Blue Lake Rancheria, and the 29 tribes of the California Nations Indian Gaming Association. I don't even know how to begin outside of saying that it is an honor, first of all, to be here today on behalf of James Ramos, as this is a historic moment for California Indian country. James is uniquely qualified for this position, and I can't express the strongest support for him. He is not only a successful tribal leader, he is also passionate about education for not only Native Americans, but for all of California. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good morning. Good afternoon. Barrett Snyder, on behalf of School Innovations and Advocacy. A letter was submitted to you by the primary partners in our firm, Jack O'Connell and Kevin Gordon. We're an advocacy firm in K-12 education, primarily have management clients. And we wanted to testify in support of all the appointees today, but particularly in regards to Ms. Rucker. Some issues have been brought up. We've worked with Ms. Rucker both in the capacity as a lobbyist for CTA, but also over the last 6 months in her role at the State Board, and we have no question in her ability to be fair and make decisions in the best interest of kids, and we support her nomination.
Very
Thank you.
good. Appreciate that. Mr. Molina?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Frank Molina on behalf of the San Ynez Band of Shumash Indians and the Pinole-Valpomo Nation for all the reasons that Mr. Encinas and Ms. Treat reiterated. We're in strong support of Mr. James Ramos. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Judith Michaels, California Federation of Teachers, and we're here to support the nomination of Ms. Rucker. I do want to say that we think that her philosophy about a balanced preparation is very important, and just one of our concerns is that as long as the success of a high school is determined by the number of students who are accepted by UC, there is a real dilemma that you've outlined so well, Senator Steinberg, in regard to the emphasis on CTE versus how we measure success in our high schools. And we feel confident that Ms. Rucker will work on that.
Thank you. But my point, again, it's not a dilemma. It's the work that needs to get done to integrate the two. It's only a dilemma if we continue to make it a dilemma. Thank you.
If I may, that is, I
That's
agree.
What you meant. I know.
That is what I meant, because as long as the UC says that you have a successful high school, if more students go to college, That's how success is measured right now, and we do need to solve that.
Thank you.
Mel Osterguy for Compton Unified School District and our firm. We're here to support the confirmation of all the nominees, all the appointees, and particularly Patricia Rucker. We think she brings a blend of being an educator at the university system, being a classroom teacher, being an advocate, and a specialist in federal funding that is really vital to the board. But we think the entire panel deserves confirmation. We urge you to do so. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm Andrea Ball. I'm here in a personal capacity today, although I've had the pleasure of working with many, if not most, of these nominees for the last over 15 years that I worked in education policy. I will identify myself today as a jackrabbit, so Senator Harman, I hope you won't. But my father was a Wilson grad, so, you know. Anyway, I've had the pleasure, especially of working with Dr. Cohn for many years. In fact, he was on the faculty at Poly when I was a student just a few years ago. So really pleased with all the nominees. Thank you.
Carlos Valdez on behalf of the San Manuel Band of Mission Indians, here in strong support of Chairman James Ramos. Not only will he bring much needed insight to the Native American community and the issues that the Native American community faces in the public education system, but his expertise and his background in serving all Californians will be greatly shown through the state here. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Valdez, appreciate it. Assemblymember Brownlee, thank you for coming to the committee.
Thank you very much, Senator. And while you were gone, I had the opportunity to introduce Dr. Eileen Strauss, but I didn't have the opportunity to really speak in support of all 7 candidates, and had the rare opportunity to be able to sit through the entire dialogue here today. And I think we have a very rich candidates here, and I'm convinced that these members, in conjunction working with the legislature, that we will have a very collaborative team and can make tremendous amount of progress here under the dome relative to education.
Sure
so
can.
Thank you.
And thank you for your excellent chairing of the Assembly Education Committee. Excellent. Are there witnesses in opposition to any of the nominees? All right. If not, I just want to say that I think the governor has appointed an outstanding Board of Education to the person. To the person. Senator Huff testified, we appreciate it, has raised some broader concerns, not necessarily about the individual nominees, but about the direction of education policy. That's fair. I'd like to see if we can wrap up those discussions in the next couple of days so that we can act favorably on all of the nominees by the 9th of September. That would be the intent, but of course it'd be up to the members to consider that. Senator Harman?
Well, I just perhaps a little clarification, if you could give us some guidance. Are you suggesting that we would not vote on any of the nominees today and would hold votes on all of them? Or
I'm sorry. I should have distinguished. I should have been clear. I'm talking about floor votes. I'd like to move the nominations to the floor today. If the members of the minority party are not prepared to do so, maybe an abstention or something for purposes of leaving, the question open is perfectly respectable. Any vote's respectable. It's your vote. But that might be a suggestion. And then we go to the floor. We can have these discussions that Senator Huff raised and hopefully wrap that up quickly and then actually have the votes on the nominees on the floor sometime, I would hope, early next week.
All right, fine.
That would be my...
I think that's probably a fair way to proceed. That's agreeable to me.
Okay. Very good.
But we are going to vote on the nominees today.
Yes. Yes. I think, so we'll take a motion from Senator Alquist. Let's call the roll on all 7 of the nominees.
We would ask,
you want to separate them?
Yes,
I'm sorry.
I would separate out agenda item 2B, Dr. Kirst, and then item 2E, Ms. Ruck.
Okay, so let's take 2A, Dr. Cohn, C, don't know if Dr. Molina, Chairman Ramos, Dr. Strauss, and Dr. Ms. Williams.
We're going to bless you with a
Okay,
doctorate.
let's take 5 out of the 7 on one vote, not including Ms. Rucker and Dr. Kirst. Okay, so that'll be Senator Alquist's motion. Please call the roll on that motion.
Senators Alquist? Aye. Alquist, aye. DeLeon? Aye. DeLeon, aye. Fuller? Aye. Fuller, aye. Harmon? Aye. Harmon, aye. Steinberg?
Aye.
Steinberg, aye.
All right, let's take a motion on the nominations of Dr. Kirst and Ms. Rucker. Moved by Senator DeLeon. Please call the roll on.
Senators Alquist? Aye. Alquist, aye. DeLeon? Aye. DeLeon, aye. Fuller? Harmon? Steinberg?
Aye.
Steinberg, aye.
That passes 3-0 with 2 respectable abstentions. And we'll go to the floor and we'll try to work out the remaining business in the next couple of days. All right? Thank you all very, very much. Appreciate it. Okay. Okay, we've got now items, members, if we may. Items 3 through 14. Are there any issues on 3 through 14 that members want to separate? No? And then we've got well, hold on if you don't mind. We have 3 walk-ons. 2 walk-ons. Senator Alquist's request regarding the introduction of a special guest on the 2nd of September, and Senator Price's request to waive the 2 4-day file notice to hear Assemblymember Garrick's bill. And the committee blackout rule, right.
Just one technical on item 7, which is my request. The date of September 1st should be September 6th.
Okay, without objection, we will make that September the 6th.
Thank you.
Okay? Please call the roll on the motion, including the 2 walk-ons.
Senators Alquist? Aye. Alquist, aye. DeLeon? Aye. DeLeon, aye. Fuller? Aye. Fuller, aye. Harmon?
Aye.
Harmon, aye. Steinberg?
Aye.
Steinberg, aye. Do you want to add Fuller to the first?
Okay, Senator Harmon or Fuller?
Sorry.
Senator Harmon, there were a couple of measures before you got here. Let's open the roll on, this is the Gambling Control Commission, Ms. Conklin, Ms. Hammond, and was there any others? Those 2.
Yes, thank you very much.
Yes, please call the absent member.
Senator Harmon?
This is on both of them?
Yes, Conklin and Harmon.
Need to separate
You need to separate them. Ms. Conklin first. Go ahead.
Okay. Senator Harmon?
I'm going to be not voting on that one because of my prior affiliation, and she worked for me for many years, and I think it would be better if I abstained.
Well, that's okay. Okay.
And then
on Ms. Hammond, please call the absent member on Ms. Hammond.
Senator Harmon?
Aye.
Senator Harmon, aye.
Okay, great. So Senator Hammond goes out 5-0. Excuse me, Ms. Hammond goes out 5-0. Ms. Conklin goes out 4-0 with an abstention. And if there is nothing else, Ms. Glickfield, we're going to put on the agenda next week for vote only, I believe. All right? We do have an executive session here, very short. Okay. So the regular session will stand in adjournment. We're going to have a 2-minute executive session.